Yes.
Okay. Well, maybe my video will come on and maybe it won't. Good afternoon. So I'm an associate scientist in CISL and in RAL, and our group has had over the last few years visitors who are philosophers of science coming to visit us and talk to us. So this is gonna be a little bit of a change of pace here, but I'm gonna talk about some of the stuff that we've figured out by talking to them and some of the practical implications of their work. Philosophers of science really study how science works. You know, our own stories that we tell about how we do science are not always accurate. And so what they want to look into is, how do scientists actually practice science? What do we actually do? And how do we develop new understanding from that process? So I'm going to talk about two things: perspective and models, which is some work done by Monica Einhorn-Morrison, who is currently a postdoc in CGD. She's a paleo polar floater, but she also has projects in RAL and M-Cube. So anyone at NCAR who wants to talk to her, she's got some really interesting things to talk about. And I'm also going to talk about the data-centric nature of climate science, which is some work that I collaborated with Lisa Lloyd at Indiana University, Greg Lusk at Michigan State, and Stuart Gluck at Johns Hopkins. So perspective and models. There's a famous aphorism by statistician George Box, which is, all models are wrong, but some models are useful. And I want to say, you know, some of this stuff may seem kind of esoteric at first, but I think what my experience of it is that after you've talked through these things, a lot of them are sort of really obvious once they've been pointed out to you, and they're things that are useful to keep in the back of your mind while you're working on scientific software. So all models are wrong, but some models are useful, which is sort of a provocative statement. But if you think about what a model is an idealized representation of some complex system that captures the important aspects of it, right? A model is an approximation of reality. It's an analog that provides you insight about how the system works. It's a useful fiction, basically. So when he says that all models are wrong, what we mean is that all models are approximate, they're simplified, they're incomplete, which is just the nature of a model, right? A model is not the thing itself. It's a representation that focuses only on what's important about that system. It leaves out all the unimportant detail. Any details that aren't essential aren't in your model. So the model's not going to have everything, because that's what a model is, right? And then the question is okay, so if the model only has the important stuff, how do we decide what's important? And this is where we get to the point of perspective. Models are, by their nature, they're simplified and incomplete, right? To make a model, you have to decide what you want to include and what you want to leave out. And perspective is just, what is the model focusing on, right? A model has got something that you're trying to capture, and that's what it's focusing on. And the stuff that is not the stuff that you're trying to capture, all this stuff that you are regarding as incomplete, that's what gives your model perspective. Now, it's really important to throw some caveats in here. The fact that a model has perspective does not mean that the model is subjective or made up or anything. The fact that it has perspective doesn't have any impact at all on whether or not your model is accurate or truthful or objective or realistic. The fact that models have perspective, that's not bad, that's not a criticism, that's just reflecting the fact that the model cares about some things more than it cares about other things, because it's a model, it's not a replication of the real thing. Okay, but that does mean, the fact that it has perspective means that models are better for some purposes and worse for other purposes. If you think about a map, right? A map is, we're taking the surface of a three-dimensional object, the sphere, and we're converting into a two-dimensional object, which is a projection onto the flat plane. And You can't retain all the properties of a spherical surface when you project it into a two-dimensional flat surface. So you have to pick and choose what you want to keep, and that's going to influence what your model, the map, is good at. The mall-wide projection preserves area. That's good for teaching about geography. The Mercator projection preserves angles, which is good for navigation, but really terrible if you want to understand that Greenland is actually much smaller than Africa. The gnomonic projection preserves the shortest route, but it definitely doesn't preserve area, and it doesn't preserve angles. Depending on what you want to do, you're going to pick a different model to do it with. So the other thing about this is that your perspective reflects the values of the model developers and the model development process, right? Models leave things out because time and resources are limited. You can't focus on everything. You can't make infinite models that cover everything in the universe. The simplifications of the model provide us with insight, and sometimes we leave things out because we don't fully understand it. The model's perspective depends on what you decide to put in and what you decide to put out, and those decisions are influenced by the values of the development, right? And here's some questions that reflect what those values are. Things like, what questions are you trying to answer, and what are you trying to accomplish with this model? What is this model's purpose, and who is the audience for this model? What's it trying to capture? What do you think is important about this system? What matters more, the details or the big picture? Do you think that you'll get the big picture right automatically if you get the little details? Do you only care about the big details and the big picture, and you don't care about the details? These are the values that go into developing a model. And these aren't political agendas. These are just the reasons why the model is what it is. These are all just statements about the way that models are, right? And there are some consequences. So the fact that every model has a perspective means that it's good to have multiple models. Different models are good at different things, and no model is good at everything. So models are good at what you tune them to be good at, which is influenced by the perspective, right? And so comparing models that have different perspectives can help you to understand what they capture well or what they don't. If you've got two models and they disagree with each other, the place where they disagree is where the differences between the models are actually significant. So for example, we did some research recently looking at very large simultaneous wildfires, and we found that in the Rocky Mountain region, we were getting different results for what happens in the future with WRF and with RegCM4, both of which are regional climate models. The RegCM4 has high land atmosphere coupling, which is the drying feedback in the warm season, and WRF has low coupling. And so that tells us that for this physical process in this region, the difference between these models points out that that is important for what's going on here. And so that's something that is much easier to understand and to recognize if you're comparing two models that have different perspective than if you were just trying to look at one model. Another consequence is that users need to understand what the perspective of a model is in order to use it well. And to know whether a model is going to work well for a particular purpose, you have to understand why it's designed the way it is, right? So you need to know things like, what questions was the model intended to answer? What's it focusing on and what's it leaving out? What trade-offs were made and why? What constraints were applied to the design of the model in the first place? And what that means is that if you're developing a model, you should really be transparent about your motivations and the decisions and the values that go into the model development. There's a lot of value to be had in recording that information. Transparency is good, and this is for all the same reasons that we put comments in code when we're writing code. Reasons like bugs can exist. You can have an inconsistency between what you were trying to do and what you actually accomplished. And if you write down what you were trying to accomplish, it's a whole lot easier to determine that there was an inconsistency there. Behavior of the model doesn't tell you everything. Models can get the right answer for the wrong reasons. And trying to guess what the model was doing is difficult and error prone. If there's no information and you're trying to fill in an unknown, there could be a lot of different ways to do that. And it would really be much better to just have information from the person who is developing the model in the first place about why they made the decision they did, what decisions they made, and what their reasoning was behind it. So just like commenting code, explaining in model development what you did and why you did it that way enables others to figure out whether your model is going to work well for a particular purpose. So this is one of the big takeaways, is that here's a good practice that we developed out of asking these questions. So now I'm going to talk about the data-centric nature of climate science. And what this is we compared big data and the way that affects biology and the impact that it has in climate science. Sabino Leonelli, who's another philosopher of science, wrote a book called Data-Centric Biology, which is all about how big data has affected and in many ways transformed the field of biology. And Lisa and company came to us and said, hey, climate science is also a big data field. Why don't we do a compare and contrast and write a paper about it? So we did, and we found some interesting things, some interesting differences. So big data, when I talk about that, we talk about the 3 V's, which are volume, variety, and velocity. And the fact that big just means that, along one of those dimensions, your data is large enough that you can't use your traditional tools and methods. You have to use new tools. In biology, big data mostly is about variety, in that they're putting together data sets that have a lot of different kinds of information going into them. Gene sequences, biochemical assays, field observations, experimental measurements, and so on. And their focus is really on model organisms, where they're trying to understand how a particular organism works as a representation of how a general class of organisms works. In climate science, our big data is mostly about volume, just sheer number of bytes. We use outputs from climate models, whether they're global or regional, and we just get a lot of data, whether it's 3D, high frequency, or ensembles. We just have combinatoric explosions of how much data we can have. And our focus is on one thing, which is the Earth system, mostly its atmosphere. So the first insight is that, yes, climate science really is data-centric. And when we talk about data-centric science, what we mean is that science that prioritizes the creation and sharing of data in order to enhance its value as evidence, which is to say that you don't just make data in one experiment and use it in the context of that single experiment and then never use it again. We have data sets that we create and that get used all over the place for a lot of different purposes, different contexts. And over on the right-hand side of the slide, these are logos from all kinds of different projects and organizations that are dedicated to generating and sharing these kind of data sets. And that's, in climate science, that's kind of the norm, honestly. And there's a few reasons that we think might be the case for that. Our observations are unique. You can't rerun an experiment and get last Tuesday's weather again. It's here and then it's gone forever. So the observations are unique. The simulations that we run are expensive. They can cost hundreds of thousands or millions of core hours on a supercomputer, which is hard to get access to. You can't just rerun a bench experiment in an afternoon. And the Earth is common to everyone. So, there's kind of a tradition of like, well, nobody owns the weather that happened in Denver. It's something that everybody can observe. And so, this really points towards data being produced for use elsewhere as a common thing in climate science. In fact, climate science is so data-centric that I think we take it for granted. It took us a few conversations for me to really understand what they meant about this concept, just because I assumed that that's how everything works. But in terms of making the data available to use in other contexts, it really depends on the data being packaged appropriately for reuse. In biology, this is a very integrative process. You know, they're taking data from a bunch of different things and they're linking it together, right? Different kinds of data. And their data distribution is all about relational databases that are built on ontologies that link categories. So, you know, they've got these specified documents of like, here are different categories and here's how they relate to each other. And that's what they use to structure these databases of, you know, saying, here's a relationship between a species and a gene and an organ and a disease and a pathogen and a vaccine and how they all relate to each other. And that's what they use to structure the data and its relationships. Climate science, we're much more distributive in nature of our data packaging. Our data goes into great big flat files, netcdf files, which are just big arrays of values that are located in space and time, right? We don't have complicated relationships. We just have, here's the data and here's where and when it was. And you know, we focus on trying to have standards compliant formats for that are going to work well, but we don't do classification of the data into entities or phenomena. We don't distribute great big catalogs of hurricanes and fronts and atmospheric rivers and things like that. We just have big fields of temperature and velocity and humidity and things like that. So there's one difference. And one of the implications of that is that one of the things that the biologists have found is that organizing their big data in this way, using ontologies, can actually constrain what research can happen downstream as the data gets distributed. So for example, say you want to look at silvergrass, which is a kind of plant that has some potential for biofuel, right? And you're interested in the species Miscanthus giganteus, which is, you know, a big plant. It's inconvenient to use to grow in your lab. So you look at a related species, Miscanthus arabidopsis instead, which is a plant that people have studied to death. They've got a great big database with all kinds of information about it. And say you're interested in knowing how a particular gene affects flower formation, right? So you can go to one of these databases. This is a screenshot at the right of a website that's dedicated to the database for this species. And you can dig down into the ontology and say, okay, you know, I'm interested in developmental biology, this gene, how it affects organ formation, et cetera, and drill down through the ontology to find the information you need. And you can link somebody else's research about flower development to your research about biofuel potential, and get an integration across those topics. But that means that the questions you can ask are really influenced by the structure of the database. Like what's actually in the database and what's not in the database. What's allowed as a valid entry in the database? You know, if I'm entering plant colors and I want to enter the color of a rose, am I allowed a value other than red? Data curation matters a whole lot for this kind of data management. And it privileges easily digitized data, and it privileges data from well-funded labs that have really good IT setups, right? So it's constraining what kind of research you can do by the very nature of the fact that you're using this ontological classification system in order to structure how you put the data together. Now, this isn't a problem for climate science yet. It hasn't been a problem historically, but as we move into the era of machine learning and artificial intelligence, this may become more of a concern. Machine learning is really good at problems that you solve by looking at pictures, like where's the atmospheric river or where's the hurricane? This is really exciting because it means that we could maybe start building automated processes to develop catalogs of phenomena, which would be great because it's very labor intensive. But doing that requires large training data sets. And so that means that you're creating databases that relate phenomena to each other. And so that means that now is a good time for us to learn lessons, our field, from the field of biology about the problems that can be caused by ontologization. So in a database, who defines what the phenomena are? Who decides what counts as a drought or a heat wave or an atmospheric river? Do we have good representation of phenomena from different physical regions? Do we have input from different communities, including all of the downstream users who are going to possibly use this data? Which data sets are getting used to train these algorithms? And can all of this ontology and things be updated? So this is important because if we get it wrong, we could really limit and hinder the future research that could be done using all of this data. So big consequence here, takeaway thing to remember, ontology development really needs to be an open community effort, right? We need conferences and workshops to develop community consensus about what concepts we're using. These ontologies and classifications need to be responsive and reasonable, and they need to be reviewed and updated occasionally. But fortunately, we have an example of how to do this well. The ArtMIP project out of CGD points at some good practices, which are things like test a variety of different definitions and use a variety of different algorithms and techniques and make your training data available. And the really big one is just, try to avoid a naive, gee whiz, oh my God, machine learning can do anything approach. The thing we really want to avoid is the cowboy coder phenomenon where one person gets a grad student to work on this for a few months and produces something that everybody in the community then goes and adopts, and nobody ever reflects on what's gone into this. So those are the big insights and recommendations. So here's what you should remember from this talk is that models have perspective. That's a thing that happens. It's good to have multiple models because multiple perspective is useful. You should be transparent about the fact that your model has a perspective and what it is, and write down what your decisions are when you're doing model development and why you made those decisions the way you did. That's really valuable to other people. And in terms of insights about data centrism, climate science is a data-centric field. The way that people can reuse our data depends on how we package it. And that as we start to deal with machine learning, it's going to be important to think about how we organize and ontologize this data, because that can really have an influence on the ways that people can use it. So that whole process should be an open community effort to develop machine learning training data sets and ontologies that they are built on. Thank you very much.